Hi, welcome to Get Used to It. Every so often, as you know on this show, if you watch it, we do an interview with one person for the whole hour because we call it Voices in Our Lives. And today I'm very, very proud to have as my guest John Heilman, who has been the mayor of West Hollywood about 127 times and has been on the council for, maybe 300 years. And he's a law professor, an intellect, an activist, one of the most fascinating men I know. And I'm really happy to welcome you here as my guest. Welcome, John.
Thanks for having me, Sheila.
Well, one of the things that I like to do is sort of set for an audience that may not know you as well, because we have a national audience, is kind of get an idea of how people, sort of how they grow up and how they set out on the path that they do, because you've devoted your whole life to public service and to issues of discrimination, harassment, and sort of the pursuit of the law and what the law can do. So let's start at the very beginning. Where were you born and where did you grow up?
Well, I'm not sure I ever grew up, but I'm
okay,
still working on that.
let me phrase that another way. Where did you spend your first 10 years?
I was born in Cleveland, Ohio, and grew up there. And my major goal growing up was trying to get out of the house and move on to someplace else. And then I went on to college at Northwestern.
So what was your family life like? What did your folks do?
My father had a small canvas shop, and my parents were divorced, so I didn't see a lot of my father. He was gone by the time I was 3, and my mother did work part-time. Didn't have a really great family life. Was kind of estranged from both parents as I grew older, and I think for a lot of LGBT people growing up, there's always that tension in the household once you start to discover who you are. And I think that was part of it, but there were other issues in my family as well.
Siblings?
I have one brother. He still lives in Cleveland with his kids. I see them regularly and torment them.
I bet you're a great uncle.
I love my nephew and nieces. They're great, and I'm really proud of what they're doing. They're moving on, going to college, and I'm excited for their future.
Well, it's interesting what you said about LGBT people growing up and how we often feel ill at ease in our families, partly because I think with other minority groups, you grow up in a family pretty much just like you.
Right.
But with us, I mean, we've talked about this before, you grow up in a family that is really not like you, so far as you know anyway. There are always some family secrets that come out later, I guess. But so what was it like for you then in school in Cleveland? Did you have a sense that you were gay? Was there any feelings about it as you were going through up to high school?
I definitely knew I was different, particularly in high school, and I did have some friends who were gay in high school. I did not identify as gay. I don't think I identified sexually at all when I was in high school. But by the time I think I was a senior, I started to know who I was. And certainly once I got to college, then the discovery was much more clear in my mind.
So what made you want to go to college?
Get out of the house. I mean, that was my principal goal.
Like move anyway.
Yes, I wasn't really an academic.
You could have moved somewhere and worked in a restaurant. I mean, you don't have to go to college. What were there interests that you had in high school that you wanted to kind of develop? I mean, we don't have much of a plan for ourselves when we're young, like what I'm going to do when I grow up, but did you have kind of an idea that you took with you to college?
I did. I wanted to go into journalism. I was the editor of my high school paper, and I really loved learning about different things. Journalism is great in that respect because you're always covering a different story, a different topic, and so you're always learning something new. So that was what appealed to me, and that's why I went to Northwestern. But for me, it was really about doing well in school was my salvation. Dealing with a not so great upbringing, it's how I sort of achieved in my way some sense of self-worth or achievement, and then carrying that through and getting off to college. That was great for me.
Of course, sometimes journalism, I don't know, I've not been a journalist or written for publications, but sometimes it seems to me it can also be a way of separating yourself from the world in order to comment on it. Of course, in high school, I think we're pretty engaged in what we're writing
Right.
about. Were there issues, sort of larger issues going on while you were in high school that affected, the paper or you?
Well, yeah, actually, remembering back now, I realized that we had conflicts with the administration because we were covering stories like drug use. And I was in an urban high school, and there was certainly a fair amount of drug use. We did a story on youth and suicide, which of course is a big issue for LGBT youth. I didn't realize it at the time.
Right.
And then we had, I think, an article on abortion. And that kind of controversial topics at that time, you didn't write about that in school newspapers. So we did have conflicts. I remember having to contact the ACLU to try to get them to intervene on our behalf so that we could continue to publish the kind of articles we wanted to publish.
Now, what would lead you to do that? I mean, how would you know about the ACLU and calling them?
No, I don't know how that came.
I guess
into
newspaper editors do understand the First Amendment,
Right.
even if they don't know what it says exactly. But
I don't know, and I think that that always stuck with me. And I knew even in law school, I remember reading their publications and trying to learn more about the rights that we have under the Constitution and their advocacy on our behalf. So, I mean, that's something that has always stuck with me, that they were there for me when I was just this kid who didn't know anything, and they were willing to give me advice as to how to deal with the administration in my high school.
so, but you weren't expelled or anything, huh?
No, although I wasn't the ideal student, I'm sure, from the administration standpoint.
Well, it's interesting because I think these kinds of experience, looking back in a way, kind of contribute to who we become or how we feel about things. Because little kids always have this sense of fairness. That's
Right.
not fair. Sometimes it's about them, sometimes it's about other things. But when you say you're not sure you've grown up yet, I totally resonate with that, because I still, to this day, feel like I'm a 4-year-old going, that's not fair. We have to do something about it, which I guess is what the ACLU does in a way.
Yeah, I think I always grew up with this sense of unfairness. I don't know whether it was because I had an older brother who picked on me, but I always felt that there were things wrong with our society, and whether it was the environment or whether it was the treatment of minorities in the country or whether it was the economic inequalities in the country, I always had that sense that something isn't right about that and we need to do something about it. I remember even working, sort of organizing park cleanup days, and this is when I was still in high school. I didn't know what I was doing, but it was part of my early activism, I think.
So what was college like for you?
For me personally, I thought I'll get out of that household and then everything is going to be fantastic and all my problems will be solved. And then you realize a lot of those problems are internal problems. And so it was a struggle for me in part. I was still very active and involved. We did a lot of really cool things. We brought speakers on campus. I was involved with the LGBT group there. And this was quite some time ago, where it wasn't so common to have those sort of groups on college campuses. And it was great. But it was also, I think, on a personal level, emotionally more challenging for me than I had anticipated, because I had set it up as, suddenly freedom and all my problems are going to disappear. And then I realized, no, I've got to solve my own problems.
That often is a problem in college, where, some people only have the problem of where should I do my laundry, and
Right.
it's just fine with them. But college also tests, in a lot of ways, things that we believed and didn't even know that we were, holding on to. Although I think your generation was much more sort of exploratory in high school about understanding what you didn't believe in or what you didn't have faith in. My generation was very go along. Then we went to college and it was like, oh my God, you mean they've been lying to us? So did you continue with journalism in college?
I actually started off as a dual major in math and journalism, but I left math after a while because I realized no one washed their hair in that department and it just wasn't right for me. it was so amazing being in sort of upper level math classes and realizing I couldn't understand anyone because in my department no one spoke English, and no one, personal hygiene was not a high priority in the math department. But there were some amazingly intelligent people there, and I still love math, but I went more in the journalism line, and that was my degree.
So does that mean you worked on the newspaper at college, or that you were doing things outside in addition?
I did work on the newspaper in college, but I also we created a couple of specialty newspapers. We had a feminist journal at that time. Really enjoyed writing on that, and we had some great articles there. Again, some cutting edge things that weren't being reported in the main school newspaper. And we also brought in speakers, again, from outside of the campus to participate. It was a good experience.
So I know that you went to law school here in California because you were in one of my classes. I think that's where we first met. But you haven't yet talked about how you were thinking of getting to the West Coast, if you were. So you're facing graduation in college. You're a writer. You're a journalist. How do you think about the future and what happened next?
I don't think I thought about the future. I was just trying to get through college, and I did it in 3 years. So I actually spent a year before I went to law school working in a congressman's office back in Illinois and doing constituent services and really learning how that was done and the different departments and the different requests that came into a congressperson's office. Then I really enjoyed that, and I had taken some law-related classes. I really decided that was something I was fascinated with, and I wanted to pursue it. And kind of, decided, okay, I'll take the LSAT, and I didn't realize that there were courses that could help you with that. I just, okay, I'll go in and take it, and I did well, and then applied to law schools, and I wanted to go to either Harvard or Yale or someplace warm. And Harvard and Yale said, go someplace warm.
Harvard or Yale or someplace warm.
Right.
Yeah. Well, you ended up someplace warm, which is very lucky for us, I think, in California.
Oh, and
so did you have an idea about the law? Because honestly, I didn't. When I started, I thought, again, it had something to do with fairness, I thought, but I wasn't quite sure. Did you have an idea what you kind of wanted to do with it?
No, I think that, for me, I went to law school because of that sense of fairness and how the law could be used to advance social justice. And I kind of went with the mindset of, I'm going to do something that was civil rights oriented. And then you get to law school and you realize there's so many different fascinating areas of the law, and it's not always easy to just go into civil rights unless you, when you're facing lots of student debt. And but I'm so glad I went to law school. It just really exposed me to so much. Probably like you, I didn't have any lawyers in my family. No one in my
family had ever even gone to college.
Right,
so.
the same with me. So no one was saying, oh, do this, get a clerkship with a judge. I didn't know any of that.
Yeah, it's funny when we were talking about family too, how similar, because I think you didn't really have grandparents around, and I didn't either. Just I think one grandmother.
Yeah, I had one grandmother. All of the others had died before I was born. My parents were a little bit older when I was born, and my father had a brother who died when I was 1 or 2. My mother was an only child, so there wasn't a whole sense of family. I did have some cousins, my father's brother's kids. Turns out that several of the kids in that family, several of my cousins, 2 of them are gay. So maybe there is a genetic connection.
I always thought there was.
Yeah.
So, but moving to California, I mean, everyone always thinks, oh, well, that's easy, we'll just move to California, but it isn't that easy. I mean, you essentially leave behind everything you know and everyone you know.
Yeah.
And you go to this place, which, again, it's sort of like going to college, where you think California will solve all my problems. I'm sure it's just, a place to be free. Did you feel trepidatious going to California, or just big opportunity, or?
Yeah, I think when you're younger, you don't realize what you're doing. So in some respects it's good. You just pack up everything and you drive to California, and I'll find an apartment, and you don't have any worries about it. And I think, of course, when you go to law school too, you're sort of thrown in. You've got all this work to do, particularly the first year, and you have this ready-made set of colleagues or friends. And that was great. So you really don't have any time to worry about anything because you're studying all the time, going to classes, and so I really kind of just got thrown in here, and it all worked out all right. It was, for me, I also had to work during my first year because of financial reasons, and so I had some connections at work that at least there were people I knew through work that were not in the law school craziness.
How did you find work?
Actually, it was I worked for the LA Weekly, doing typesetting for them, and at the time they had a new machine, and somehow or another I was doing that typesetting back in Chicago, and there was a connection. People knew somebody in Chicago, and they said, "Oh, he's moving out here. He can type the ads for you because he knows how to do that." And so I used to sit there typing, and usually on the phone while I was doing it, and talking about what was going on in law school and trying to get caught up on studying. We would have study groups, and we would kind of talk on the phone about issues that we didn't understand.
So, but you also worked with the ACLU, I think, when you were in law school.
Yeah, we started a...
Talk about things coming back together again,
right.
Huh?
We started a chapter at USC, and eventually, I think this was, I'm not sure whether I was still in law school or right after, I went on the board of the ACLU, and that was an amazing experience, just meeting so many people who were and are still activists on civil rights issues.
So did you form an idea in law school about what you wanted to do next?
No, I again...
Listen, I
still don't know what I'm doing tomorrow.
It's nice, though, in a way, where you say, I'm going to do everything I ever want to do. I'll just decide what to do next.
Right. I guess I wanted to just go into civil rights litigation. There wasn't a job. I was in the running for a clerkship with Rose Bird, who was on the Supreme Court at the time. That didn't work out, and I worked for a couple of small firms immediately after I got out of law school, and then got involved with the cityhood campaign here in West Hollywood. Yeah,
talk about that, because I think a lot of people across the country certainly have heard of West Hollywood. It's thought of as a gay mecca, though I think up close and personal, it's much more of a fabulous experiment in multiculturalism. People don't know. A very progressive city. So it wasn't incorporated when you got involved in it? It was just unincorporated part of LA County.
Yeah, and it was strange because here we are in the middle of Beverly Hills on one side, Los Angeles surrounds us on three sides, and it was an island in the middle of LA County, very highly developed already, and we didn't have a city council. We didn't have any kind of local government other than the county supervisor. And I think one of the key things that drove the cityhood campaign was rent control, which we had in the county, but then the supervisors changed from a more progressive to a more conservative group, and they were going to phase out rent control. 80% of our residents, I think at the time 85% of our residents were renters, many of them seniors, and we were going through a period with lots of speculation. So people were being pushed out of their homes, or their rents were being jacked up sometimes 2 or 3 times in a year. So that was one of the large motivating forces to put cityhood together. But then there were a lot of other people concerned about development issues, hotels being placed in residential areas, and then of course the gay and lesbian community at the time looking for opportunities to elect openly gay people. So all of those forces sort of converged to really make the push for cityhood happen, back in '83, and then '84 is when we finally incorporated.
But how do you get to be a part of that? I mean, you know, in a way, here
Yeah.
you are, you just get out of law school, you're looking for work, clerkship doesn't quite work out, you go to work with a couple of different firms. How do you get involved in a fight for cityhood? I mean, I know a lot of it is random. It's kind of
Right.
like, gee, I don't know, I met this guy in a restaurant and he said, you know, come to a meeting, and next thing you know, I'm being arrested as a communist and whatever. But how do you get involved in this? I mean,
I was involved somewhat with the fight over rent control, and there was a countywide initiative to try to have rent control in the county, and that failed because most of the county isn't like West Hollywood. And there was also a Democratic group, the Harvey Milk Democratic Club, which is no longer operating in Southern California. And so I was involved with that organization. And there was a group of people who were working on incorporation. They had formed a loose committee at that time, and they reached out to get representatives from these other organizations. And because of my involvement, those organizations said, John, why don't you come along and be involved in this? And so I joined the incorporation committee, and we worked together to get the signatures and to sort of fight for cityhood.
and were you on the ballot for city council at the same time as incorporation?
Yeah, the vote for incorporation occurred in 1984, and at the same time the voters were asked to vote yes or no on incorporation, and they were also asked to, if there is incorporation, if we are a city, then who are your council members going to be? And it was wild. There were, I think, 43 candidates. You did a candidates forum, and you had a minute, and that was it. I mean,
There were more of you on the stage.
Yeah, no, actually, there were a couple of public forums where the auditorium was overflowing with people. I mean, the level of interest was that high.
So what was the dream of the city of West Hollywood that you think brought all those people into those auditoriums and made people want to be a city instead of just part of the county?
I think local control was the overriding push, that we would have our own local government, that whether we did things right or wrong, at least there was going to be control at the local level over land use issues, that we could set our own destiny. Kind of it's the dream, I think, of all people, that you have some sense of involvement and control, and that you can chart your own course for the future. And for a gay and lesbian community, certainly it was enacting non-discrimination ordinances, enacting domestic partnership ordinances, prohibiting AIDS discrimination, and then just having openly gay and lesbian people in office and in that position. Because at the time we became a city, there weren't many. When we had a conference in 1985 with openly gay and lesbian elected officials from across the country, I think there were 11 of us. And now, of course, there are several hundred all across at different levels. We have state senators and we have people in Congress. It's wonderful. But at the time, it was really a very small, select group.
But it was more than just local control, wasn't it, John? I mean, you can have local control and not do good things.
Right.
There was such a feeling of the need to establish a progressive city. I mean, I live in Santa Monica, and in Santa Monica, it was not like that from the beginning, and there was kind of a revolution during revolution times, so 30 years ago, to take over the council and make the city have a particular kind of character. But this was a city that started out with a notion of that character from the beginning.
Yeah, I think we've always had a group of people in West Hollywood who are progressive. We have a large Jewish population. Many of them came out of progressive causes or were escaping oppression elsewhere, and so they really were steeped in the history of sort of progressive Jewish politics. And then the LGBT population was certainly more often than not aligned with progressive causes. We're overwhelmingly Democratic. I mean, think about 88% of our residents are registered Democrats. So the fights we have here are usually over how progressive do we need to be, and how pragmatic, sort of balancing the pragmatism with the progressivism. But yeah, there was always a sense that we were going to be a cutting-edge city, that we were going to be a city that was going to take stands, and that we were going to take risks and do things a different way. And I think you can see that in the history of our legislation. We were the first city to divest from South Africa and not do business with companies that were involved in the apartheid regime. We were the first city to have a domestic partnership registration program.
Right.
We were the first city, along with LA, to ban discrimination on the basis of HIV or AIDS. And some of those things now are very commonplace. But at the time, people were like, oh, well, that's different. That's something that cities aren't supposed to do. And we took risks. And we've still done things in the area of animal cruelty and the area of gun control. We've tried to be a leader on so many different issues, and I think we're respected for that.
Well, I think that it's exemplary of what a city can do. I mean, there are so many overlapping areas of government in of course, we know California best, but I think it's the same in every state in the country, where you have, city government, you have county government, whatever they call the counties, you have the state government and the federal government. You all have special districts of some kind that are supposed to deliver the water, or supposed to build a freeway or a toll road, or you have public-private partnerships. There's so much overlap that people don't quite understand how much a city can really accomplish for its residents. What's the biggest struggle you think that the city has had?
Oh, I think there are two major struggles. I think housing and affordability of housing. With so many seniors, many of them limited to Social Security alone or small pensions, they can't afford market rents, and some of them are paying 75–80% of their relatively small income towards rent, and that's a very big challenge. And particularly with cutbacks in the Section 8 program on the federal level, it's been a very difficult challenge. And trying to create new affordable housing for seniors, it's not easy, because the cost of building new housing, it's the same as building market rate housing. So you've got the same land costs, the same construction costs, and sometimes you even have extra costs because of the complexity of those projects. So that is a big challenge. I think another big challenge we faced was AIDS, and I think we hopefully have turned the tide somewhat with the medications that are now available, but watching a whole community be decimated, and you know what that was like, watching people die sort of every week, losing people on commissions and employees and the head of the Chamber of Commerce. And I never thought we were going to live through that. I mean, just survive that, individually, but collectively, that loss of intelligence and ability was just devastating for our community, but we just kept pushing along. And right now, I think we're facing the challenge of our success. We're so successful in many ways. This is such a desirable place to live. The housing costs are going even higher. People are, willing to spend $1 million on a 2-bedroom condo. They're willing to, tear down a 10-unit building to put up 8. And it doesn't seem to make sense economically, but given the housing prices here, it pencils out for a developer to do that. So trying to address that challenge, trying to, again, plan for the future and make sure we have places for people to live in the future, while at the same time trying to, as much as we can, protect the people who live here now. And that's a challenge for, I think, local government throughout California.
I see that all along the coast, actually, the left coast, as they call it, the west coast. Even in the central part of the state, where you had almost bucolic kind of little sea towns, the waterfront property and anywhere within 3 or 4 blocks of it, in the middle of the state, the Central Coast, etc., so that our population, in order to find affordability, is kind of leaving and moving inland where sort of land is cheaper. And I think it's all kind of a victim of its own success, because the more wealthy live closer to the ocean, and even though we're several miles away here in West Hollywood, it's really very much the same thing, as well as being a hip place to live and a tolerant place to live and a very good services. So you're right, talk about it is a victim of our own success, because we lose our senior population. They can't afford us anymore. We don't have a good mix in terms of the different classes. It's hard to hold on to. But the city's done very well, I think, in at least putting a stake in the ground and trying to do the right thing.
Yeah, we've really tried to adopt policies that will ensure in the future that we do retain that diversity. We have an inclusionary housing program, so when new things are built, developers have to include low or moderate income units in their new development or pay into a fund. We've developed a number of permanently affordable housing units. I think it's about 270 units through a housing corporation that we created. And we continue to advocate on behalf of our existing tenants. So we're trying to do that, and we're also trying to do some mixed use so that we take pressure off of our existing residential area and give, again, give opportunities for the new people who are coming to this area to live in the area. Of course, we face another challenge, which is traffic and parking. The whole west side, the traffic issue is a serious issue. We need to have mass transit here, and we've been working with the west side cities to try to advocate for that.
Well, there's another big part of your life, and I don't know exactly how you made that transition, but I mean the way you earn your living now, as it were, since they don't pay you a whole lot to be on the city council in West Hollywood. Teaching the law, how did that come about, and why did you want to do that?
I really love teaching. I didn't realize that at the time. I did it because one of my classmates was teaching legal writing, and she said, "Would you be interested?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd be interested in doing that, because I like the idea of teaching." And I started off teaching one class, and then it was 2, and then suddenly it was 4, and then I was teaching, some of the substantive courses, and the students reacted well to me, and I really think it was something that I didn't realize that I didn't actively pursue, but then once I started doing it, I said, I really like this. And it also works well with, the council time schedule. As a professor, you're not expected to necessarily be there from 9 to 5 every day, so if you have a city commitment during the day, or you have a meeting or an event you have to go to, as long as it doesn't interfere with your teaching schedule, you're free to do that. And I think the students also love the idea that I'm out there and I'm actually helping to draft laws or make laws, and being involved in that kind of debate about public policy. They're constantly asking, well, how did you do this, or why did you do that, or wow, well, that must have been interesting to be involved in that debate. So I think it connects well with the students.
What do you teach, John?
A little bit of everything. I joke that I teach whatever the person on sabbatical teaches. I've been teaching torts for a long time, personal injury, teaching evidence, which in law school I didn't really like. I think I missed most of it, but I love evidence. There are rules. It makes sense to me logically. I've taught civil procedure, criminal law, community property. I teach that at USC. I've taught AIDS and the law and LGBT issues. We can't offer that course every semester, but I try to offer it every couple of years. It's a seminar course, and it's great.
And you've been actually, you were instrumental in starting a program overseas to take students from your law school and other law schools that want to join in. I had no idea that you were doing that until you asked me to teach in Amsterdam a couple of years ago. And tell us a little about that.
Well, we started a program. A lot of law schools have programs that are summer abroad programs. So you could go to Spain or England and study there. And you study a little bit about the law of that location, but there's usually an international focus to it. We started a program that is a summer abroad program that focuses exclusively on issues involving sexual orientation in the law. So we were fortunate enough to have you come over and teach a course on gay and lesbian
And
youth.
other even more brilliant people.
Oh, I don't know if there is anyone more brilliant than you, Sheila.
Stop.
And we offered it in Amsterdam at the University of Amsterdam, which is one of the oldest universities in Europe. And it was a great opportunity for American law students, most of them actually not LGBT students,
right.
Who were interested in the topic or interested in Amsterdam, coming over and watching them study issues that in some instances were foreign to them or were very personal to them, and watching that interaction and that growth. Also, just getting the leaders of the ACLU, Lesbian and Gay Rights Project, the people from Lambda, somebody from the National Center for Lesbian Rights, having them all together and doing sort of a panel together. You don't get that opportunity in most law schools. So it was really a fascinating opportunity, and we hope to continue it many years into the future.
Well, it reminded me, when you said panel, actually, I think it might be a good idea as a part of that program when you do it again, to have an evening, or maybe you did and I had not participated or something, but an evening when all of those professors who are there participate. Because I remember when we were talking about first bringing cases to the Supreme Court that had to do with sexual orientation, and had an event sponsored by the Gay and Lesbian Center here, with a number of theorists from around the country about how we should be in the Constitution. How could we find ourselves in the Constitution, in the 14th Amendment, in equal protection or due process or any of those. And it was really kind of fascinating to have more than one person talking at a time about sort of these larger issues. And you would, of course, participate too, because it was fascinating being there, even sitting around at dinner as we did in Amsterdam and talking about this. What do you think of the level of development of legal theory about our issues in the country?
I think it's amazing what has happened in the last, since I've got out of law school. I mean, the level of dialogue and debate has changed dramatically. I mean, we did do one of those panels last year, right after
great.
some of the marriage decisions, and those decisions weren't favorable to us, but we had Matt Coles, and we had John Davidson from Lambda, and we had Kate Kendall from National Center for Lesbian Rights, all doing a panel discussion about what did these decisions mean, and what was the future, and what should we be focusing on. I think that the level of receptivity to our issues has changed dramatically, and people are able to talk about them in ways that they couldn't be discussed even when I was in law school. In law school, I was writing a note on gays and lesbians in the military. This was my law review note. And I remember one of the editors saying, well, that's not really a serious legal topic. Mm-hmm. And looking back, I think, well, you were wrong, obviously, because these topics are the cutting edge civil rights issues. And we have some brilliant theorists and brilliant practitioners who've been advancing the whole marriage dialogue on so many different levels, not only litigation, but now through legislation, and getting that legislation approved through the California legislature and getting it on the governor's desk. And that's something I never thought we would be able to do. And I think it's the result of so many years of advocacy and people being out, and people, they can't demonize us. Too many people know LGBT people, and you can't use the same tricks that they did 20 years ago.
Well, the sort of the meeting of organizing, grassroots organizing, community-based organizing about the rights of LGBT folks, and the sort of legal theory piece of it, because I think when you're organizing for something, you don't care whether it fits into a legal theory, you just want it.
Right.
But if you have to go to court to secure it, you have to have some kind of a legal theory. And I was actually thinking about our community and our legal theory when the last decision concerning abortion came out not very long ago from the United States Supreme Court. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg, in dissent, had throughout her life, even before she was on any court, had brought these cases about women's equality and trying to find that theory in the law that works. And she was working under equal protection in the 14th Amendment, but the whole Roe v. Wade and privacy issue sort of came from a different direction in the Constitution. And she had always felt that that had its limits, this
right.
privacy thing, and we really needed to work on this equal protection part, even as it related to abortion. And she repeated it again in her dissent in that case. And we have taken many pages from sort of the gender litigation and constitutional theories. Do you see that we need to kind of develop that theory for ourselves? Because we haven't done so great in the equal protection area.
Well, I think there are limits to the argument that was made, particularly in the Hawaii case, that denying LGBT rights to marry was a form of sex discrimination. I thought that was an argument that we shouldn't have been making. Mm-hmm. Whether it was successful or not, I thought it undermined our efforts to ensure equality for women and girls. And it was the argument that was being made against the Equal Rights Amendment, that, oh, this is going to legitimize gay marriage. I don't think anyone who supports equal rights for women and girls necessarily believes in gay rights or in the rights of gay people to marry. Mm-hmm. I don't think, when you vote for an Equal Rights Amendment, you're not voting for gay marriage. And to try to use that argument, I thought it was a mistake. Mm-hmm. It seemed more like a case of legal trickery rather than being right up front and saying we should have the right to marry because it's the right thing to do, and because I think it is more of an issue of privacy and whether that's something the government should be involved in, telling who should be allowed to marry one another and who shouldn't. But as you know, there are limitations to the privacy argument as well. It's very difficult, and I don't mean to be critical of people who brought these cases because they've done an amazing job of, I think, taking different theories and advancing them in places where that theory had more chances of success. So what was amazing about the legal movement is how state-specific it was, and mm-hmm. how, just the same thing through the sodomy challenges, going to particular states and using either an equal protection argument or privacy or cruel and unusual punishment argument where it was most appropriate. And I think that's a testament to the brilliance of the LGBT legal community, how many really smart people we've had working on these issues over the years.
So as you look at your students, do you feel optimistic that there's energy there, that there's passion there, that there's intellect there to continue this? Because sometimes you see movements, it's what our historian hero John D'Amelio calls leaping and creeping, where things go along and they don't seem to be doing anything, and then suddenly you get a leap. But it's the preparation of the creeping that's made the leap possible. And education is, I don't mean to demean it in any way, but it's a form of that creeping. Who are we preparing and how are we preparing them? Are you optimistic about our future with with young people doing this legal work?
Absolutely. I mean, what amazes me is how so many people, even conservative students, take our rights for granted. They just assume that there should be equality for lesbian and gay people. It is not something, and I have some very conservative Republican students who, they are diehard Republicans, but they will tell me I don't agree with the party on any of that gay stuff because they're crazy. And of course gay people should have equality, and of course, and they'll even go as far as saying, and of course gay people should be allowed to marry. So I think that, to me, makes me optimistic. And then the young people who are really going to dedicate their life to LGBT equality, I'm in awe of them. I'm amazed at what they've done already with their lives, and how they continue to, even through law school, continue to be advocates, continue to work on issues. They extern for Lambda or ACLU or the Freedom to Marry Project. So many of those opportunities really weren't around when we were going to law school. Those organizations didn't exist. And
Right.
I think sometimes we forget that our movement in some ways is still very young, and yet even though we had the sodomy setback, we eventually won on that issue. Gay marriage, we've had, when we first adopted that domestic partnership ordinance, we were being laughed at. We were being ridiculed for doing it, and and there was questions about whether it was even legal for us to do.
And now it's the Republican fallback when they don't want
Yes.
marriage.
Yeah, now they're like, no, we don't want marriage,
we want domestic partners.
Right.
But what about its interplay with other areas? Because the immigrant rights movement is so vibrant. People of color's movements are vibrant in ways that they just seem to be growing and growing. And disability rights movement, I think, has not quite taken off as much. Certainly the resources are not there the way they have been for us. But I see a lot of different silos that are kind of breaking down as people see the interplay. Do you see your students, and anywhere in the legal community, seeing these kinds of interconnections?
Absolutely. And I think that's part of the success of the whole gay marriage debate in California, is the linkage Equality California has been able to make with NAACP and with
Farm
workers union and with labor, and our issues are not they're not in a silo. They're really connected to issues of fairness for all people, and we've been able to make those connections, not always completely, but I think we've done a good job of reaching out. And I think we've also tried to be there on other people's issues. People are now realizing that LGBT people are in all of these other organizations, and oftentimes playing leading roles in labor unions. They're playing leading roles in environmental organizations, in animal rights organizations, in humanitarian organizations. There's so many great people in our community who are successes, not just in our own organizations, but in other organizations that bring together people who care about the future.
Well, and I think that's what helps too with the connection, is that we go to work because we care about civil rights.
Right.
And we go somewhere and we're there and we're perceived as being of that movement and a
Right.
gay person.
Right.
Or of the labor movement and a gay person. So I assume you're seeing this in your students as well. I mean, I don't know, are they progressive generally? Are they like us or not like us?
Well, I get students the whole spectrum. I mean, I get students who are very conservative, I get students who are very progressive, and I get students who are passionate about different issues. I get a lot of immigrant students, students who first or second generation immigrant, who are struggling still with English, even though they're very intelligent. They're having grammatical problems, as people do when they're learning a language. But I'm amazed at the students I get from the Vietnamese community and the Korean community and the Armenian community and the Persian community. We get a lot of diverse students. And I think at law school the big challenge is African American students and trying to attract and retain them. The USC has done a marvelous job of changing the complexion of its law school. When I went there, as you remember, 25 years ago, it was a very white institution. It was not very diverse, and that has changed dramatically over time. And again, the level of leadership that these students have even prior to getting to law school, the things they've done, it's amazing to me. But really, regardless of the political spectrum, I do see that these are people who are. I really feel good about them being the shepherds of the world when we're no longer involved in politics. That must be when we're dead.
In the
right?
22nd century, whenever
Yeah.
that is, we're certainly not going to give up on that. Right. Well, that was actually going to be my next question, as we're kind of not quite close to the end, so we have some time still to talk. But what feels still undone in your life, John? What would you do? What would you want to keep gathering to yourself? I know you want to keep teaching. I know you love the city, but what's still undone in your life?
One of the things that I'm very passionate about is the AIDS crisis, internationally in particular. I mean, we're doing relatively well in this country. Most of our people have access to medication or services or programs, and people are living, hopefully, more or less normal lifespans. Not all of them, but we're able to give that hope to people. But in most of the world, people don't have access to medication. They don't have access to medical care. They don't have resources. They don't have jobs. And I think there's something terribly wrong, going back to that feeling that you have as a kid that this isn't fair. It isn't fair that because people are born in Africa, or they're born in India, or they're born in South America, that they don't have access to the drugs that could save their lives. And I think it's a real moral issue, not only for the country, but I think particularly for the LGBT community and the people who, we have struggled through AIDS. We know what it's like. We know how it can devastate people. And when you see people countries where the average life expectancy has now dropped to 37, that's not right. That's not right that that's happening when the medication is available, that there's hope out there, and those people have no hope. And that's something I think we need to change. And I think it really is incumbent upon the LGBT community and the AIDS community here in the United States to take that leadership. And we cannot just forget those people. They are people. They are people who have a right to, I think, an inalienable right to life, if you want to use the terminology. And that's something that I'm really trying to work on. We've adopted a clinic in Malawi. I think we're going to adopt an orphanage.
The city has?
The city has.
Uh-huh.
We're going to try to adopt an orphanage in South Africa, trying to connect people to resources here that, sometimes there's surplus supplies that could be used in clinics over there that would, again, help people extend their lives and really provide hope for a community and for a nation.
So would you say the glass is half full or half empty?
What are we drinking?
So it starts out half full, but then as you drink...
Yeah, I
mean, you've always seemed very kind of serious and yet also with a sort of a wicked sense of humor to me, that these things sort of interplay. But mostly I find you always very optimistic.
See, it's strange. I think, internally I go back and forth. Sometimes I'm so depressed about what's happening in the country and the level of leadership or the lack of leadership and the lack of honesty at the federal level, particularly with this administration. And then on the other hand, I'm so hopeful. I mean, to see the Democrats come to power, to see the work that has been done. And again, I think we can get caught up in the day-to-day, but then you reflect back on 20-some years of struggle, and you see, wow, we've got states where people can get married. We have finally the Federal Hate Crime Act being extended to LGBT people. Now, Bush is probably going to veto that, but
so the next president.
But the dialogue has changed, and I think so I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic in that respect, and I'm optimistic about what's happened in our community here in West Hollywood. I see so many changes that have occurred, most of them, I believe, for the better, and just our east side growing and expanding and becoming more economically vibrant. So depends on when you catch me. Usually I'm optimistic. Usually I think things are moving in the right direction. Occasionally I think we all give way to self-doubt and despair, but I overall optimistic.
Well, it's funny. You certainly haven't lived anywhere near as long as I have, but one of the things that has struck me as I've gotten older is that I have more to compare my current life with, and not only in terms of my own life, but the history of the country. The whole last half of the 20th century, when civil rights law really developed, thanks to Dr. King and so many people who, and Gandhi, who really said, we must stand up for this in a nonviolent way, but we must get it. And all of the laws that developed in the country about anti-discrimination, upon which we've patterned our movement. We've contributed to it, but we've also sort of benefited from it. And that's been a real, I think, upward climb, which makes you optimistic. Then you see all of the, the government subterfuge and the international lies and the way people keep voting and voting for people, who've lied to them.
Right.
And you think, well, that's sort of a downward trend. And I understand what you're saying, because it depends on what you're looking at. But how do you see your life as one individual in terms of, how do you feel about it if you were to sum it up, since you're not even half through it, but might as well sum it up?
I feel like I've made a lot of progress. When I look back as a kid in Cleveland, growing up in this household which was kind of out of control and not having people who went to college, I feel successful that I was able to get out of the house, go to college, go all the way across the country and go to law school, and then have this great experience being on the city council for a wonderful city and watching the progress that's been made here, and have the opportunity to go to Europe and to run a program there and to travel across the country and internationally. And I really feel like, wow, that's not something I would have ever thought when I was a kid, that I would have those opportunities. I feel like I've been really blessed in many ways with opportunities and with the chances of doing things that I never thought I would have the chance to do. In fairness, I've also worked hard, going through law school and going back to school to get a master's degree. Those aren't things that you get because you're just sitting around. But I feel like I've also been incredibly lucky with the people I've met and the experiences I've had. So it's been wonderful, and I hope I'm only halfway through.
Well, I think not even. It's funny when you use the term lucky, because I for a long time in my life, I felt like luck was such a driver of it. Because I didn't quite understand how it was that my efforts connected to my success. It seemed like some of it came sort of magically. Maybe starting out as an actor, you feel like you either get the part or you don't get the part, and it's kind of magical. But I've been thinking, what they say about you make your own luck, I do think you're lucky in terms of, who you're born to or whatever, but sometimes not. Was your mom still around when you came out to law school?
Yeah.
And is she still alive?
No, both my parents are dead. My father died when I was in law school. My mom died about 8 or 9 years ago.
So it's sort of like what you make of it, but as you said, not wholly. It's almost like you've got, these threads that go together.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think sometimes I do feel like, oh, if only I were more lucky, but then I realize most of what I've been able to do has not really been about luck. It's been about making connections, and in your case, you're extremely talented and you're very bright, and I think that success is the result of your hard work. But I think in my case, some of it is the result of hard work, and some of it is the result of just being in the right place at the right time and having an opportunity to meet people that I probably wouldn't have had I not been there. So you're right, you do make your own success, but I think some of it is just fortuitous.
Well, I can't believe a whole hour's gone by, but it has. And I'm very, very pleased that you were on the show. I hope that you're pleased as well. And we're very pleased that you were with us for this hour of interview with John Heilman. And I hope that as we look back, each of us, you and I and all the rest, on our lives, at the moment we can say, I like what I see. I got used to it.